Hello YouTube and welcome to this week's Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we're talking about the East Empire Trading Company again, the company that many know best from the Thieves Guild questline in Skyrim and from its role in Morrowind. Today we find out their backstory, when were they founded and why, and what exactly do they do other than being robbed in Skyrim. Now, long-term fans will know that I already covered this topic several years earlier, but the narration and visuals on that video, and basically all really early channel videos, are just horribly outdated, so I've decided to release a remaster of the video right here. So, let's get into the lore. So, the East Empire Trading Company. It's a powerful and semi-independent trading company loyal to the Cyrodiilic Empire. It was founded in the Third Era under the rule of the Septim Empire, presumably somewhere in the first 200 years of the Third Era. Although it was possibly founded even earlier, as we do know that by the time of Skyrim the company has existed for at least 500 years, so it might be even more than that. Now, the company came into existence after the reigning emperor at the time, likely Antiochus Septim or Sepphoris Septim, commissioned the creation of an imperial trade organization which would help him control the flow of goods through the provinces of the empire and also help extract resources from the provinces for the empire in the most profitable way. As such, it's basically modeled on the old Dutch East India Trading Company and the old British East India Trading Company, which were founded to extract profits from the east. The company would have a monopoly on certain goods from the Indies, so that all the small merchants would not be competing and thus would not be able to drive the prices down with their individual trips to the Indies, which would make goods less profitable overall. By having one big company which has the sole rights to the sale of goods from the Indies, the company could control the prices of the goods in the motherland, what they sold for, and everybody who signed up for the company expeditions to the east would be able to make a profit from the goods that's greater than whether everybody would go there independently. In addition to the higher prices that they could ask for the spices and other things from the east, being united under one flag of the East India Company gave the merchants of the company far more negotiating leverage with the local population in the Indies. As every Dutch merchant in the East Indies was part of the same faction, and also from the British, but I didn't really know, I just know about the Dutch East India Trading Company, so that's the one I'm explaining. They could come to each other's aid militarily, so every merchant had far more firepower at their backs to force the local population into submission if the local population would not trade with them. Regardless of the, ethics of this, that's how these companies used to operate, and it seems that the East Empire Company in the Elder Scrolls universe pretty much follows that same model. At least in the Third Era, when it was founded, it seems that the company mostly concerned itself with goods from Morrowind, which is in the east of Tamriel, hence why the company was named the East Empire Company, getting goods from the east of the Empire. It mainly dealt with goods from Morrowind, and with good reason, as Morrowind holds some of the most valuable goods which barely appear in other parts of the Empire. Thus, a collective price-setting monopoly for the company, just like with spices from the East Indies in our world's history, makes it so that the Empire can profit majorly from the sales of those rare Eastern goods in other parts of the Empire, making it for an important cash injection for the central government. During the days of the Septim Empire, the company had a full monopoly on the trade of Morrowind's Kwama eggs, bug musk, matze, sujama, Dwemer artifacts and ebony ore in all of the provinces outside of Morrowind, and it held a full monopoly on the export of Cyrodiilic alcohols from Cyrodiil, like brandy and their whiskey Flynn. For more information on those drinks, like Flynn from Cyrodiil, so their whiskey, and matze and sujama from Morrowind, check the video I did recently on the alcohols of Tamriel. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, this position where the company has a full monopoly on those goods made the company very profitable in the Septim days and was one of the main sources of income for the central government of the empire. While it was nominally an independent organization, I say independent with the heaviest of air quotes, as it got the far majority of its funding for its investments from the empire, and the board of directors of the company, which oversees the company's dealings and is entirely appointed by the emperor himself, and in some cases by high figures in the imperial government and the elder council. So yeah, it's not really independent as it's closely linked with the imperial government, but it operates as a company rather than an arm of the government, as just like the East India companies in our real history, They are, for example, even able to have their own security forces and their own military, and owe no real allegiance to the local imperial governments or military forces, and is only accountable to the Emperor, the Elder Council, and partly to their own stockholders, as their own workers and in some cases regular citizens can also buy stocks of the company, which actually also mirrors some of the practices of the old East India companies. And in addition to that, the company also sometimes pays their own workers in some kind of stock certificates, which they can use to either trade in for wages or the company's products. Anyway, the relative independence and lack of accountability that the company has in the provinces has made it so that many local officials of the company have been accused of corruption in the provinces and near colonial levels of greed, which again mirrors the accusations against many East India Company officials in our history. Profit is at all times the first motive of many of these officials of the company, meaning that they often try to get things as efficiently and cheaply as possible, which is why the company often employs local workers or contracts local companies for their extraction of resources. This is also a point of criticism that many of the company officials faced on Tamriel, as they are sometimes seen as to exploit the local population a bit too much for their own gains. The fact that they are actually often a mass employer of the local population, however, and that they have their own security and military forces present at their operations, means that they regularly have a big influence with local rulers, especially with poor regions in particular, as sometimes those regions are so dependent on the company for its prosperity that the company has the de facto rule over those places, as they hold massive influence over the local rulers, as if they would go out of the province, they would fall into poverty. Now, it seems that the coming of the Fourth Era and the loss of many imperial territories in the Fourth Era and the re-emergence of independent countries like the Altmeri Dominion, Argonia, elsewhere and eventually Hammerfell, and the questionable status of the independence of Morrowind, the company has lost a lot of its power and influence in the Fourth Era. With other independent nations on Tamriel, it would be nearly impossible to maintain monopolies on certain goods, especially since Morrowind, the place where most of the monopolized goods originated, seems to be de facto independent by the Fourth Era, even if they could still be part of the Empire by name. Bethesda hasn't really given us a clear situation answer. I don't know. But even if Morrowind is by name still part of the Empire, the eruption of the Red Mountain and the Accession War, in which the Argonians invaded and raided Morrowind, those two things combined would have led to financial disaster for the company, as many of its mines and plantations would have been destroyed and their workers displaced. So either way, whether Morrowind is or isn't still part of the Empire, their influence in this region would be greatly reduced. And since Morrowind was its big profitable region, well, that can't have ended financially well for the company. In the end, we know now that in the Fourth Era, the company operates almost like any other trading company on Tamriel, handling the imports and exports of all sorts of goods that we can see in their warehouse in Skyrim. We can even see on this trading map that there are more companies on Tamriel that are handling this kind of business now than just the East Empire Company, and that it's likely that each independent state on Tamriel now has their own version of the company to trade with the other nations, among other things. We know that this kind of competition makes the East Empire Company's job harder, as the Thalmor, especially the rulers of the Altmeri Dominion, seemingly try to keep them from the southern Tamrielic markets in Somerset, Valenwood and elsewhere, since East Empire merchants have to cozy up to them in order to be able to do any business in that region. The head of the company by the time of Skyrim is Vittoria Vici. She is cousin of the Emperor, and while she says that she wasn't appointed out of nepotism, the fact that she is his cousin does point to the Emperor still being able to appoint the heads of the company, or at least still holding significant sway over it, meaning that the company still isn't fully independent and likely still in the employ of the central imperial government. But we don't really have any lore on that at the moment, or really any other information on how the company is doing in the Fourth Era compared to its competitors, or what its status in Tamriel even is. We just know it still exists, and it at least imports and exports stuff from inside the Empire to outside the Empire, and we know that it does some importing and exporting of products from imperial provinces to other imperial provinces. For example, the opening of the office in Windhelm, when you reopen that, it makes it possible for you to import bread and cheese to Skyrim, which is something that the guards say when you reopened it. That's basically all we know. That's basically all that we can say on the lore of the East Empire Company. Now, this video provided most of the actual background lore that we have on them, something that my old video really didn't do, as there I just covered some individual stories in which the company was involved. So there I mostly talked about the quests in which they appear, instead of giving the story of the company itself. that's really something different that I'm trying to do in my more modern videos, where I just want to give the, you know, the lore on these factions and then have you experience the quests yourself in which they appear. So yeah, it's a bit different. So that video isn't fully outdated yet. There's a link to the old video in the description of this one if you want to hear those stories despite the bad narration, but don't expect high quality lore in there, as there was very little actual lore in that video and some of that was even wrong, so yeah. Early channel videos were such a glorious compilation of bad content, oh well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this lore video, and if you did, I hope you will consider returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video, probably next week or maybe in 2 weeks, who knows how much my research will cost in terms of time. That being said, all that rests me now is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polar Rasputin, Athena Hyotis, King Chris, Bolch, Scram of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Soto Brigido, Rakai, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to all these people and all the others that you see on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I hope to see you all in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.